Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to our City of Little Rock Board of Directors special call meeting for June 13, 2023. Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Director Miller,
Here.
Director Richardson,
Here.
Director Peck,
Here.
Director Hines, Director Lewis.
Present.
Here.
Okay. Director
Can
Wyrick.
everyone hear me?
I got you, Director Hines.
Thank you.
Director Wyrick,
Present.
Director Campuris,
Present.
Director Phillips, Director Adcock,
Present.
Vice Mayor Webb, Mayor Scott.
Here. I will now have the invocation. I'll ask Director Dean Campuris.
It's an exception to the rule.
We're grateful.
Dear Heavenly One, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to help make our community better, stronger, and a place for all people. Thank you for all the people in the world that are trying to make this a better place, and help that wisdom be with us today. Amen.
Amen. Will y'all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, if you would, please read ordinance number 1.
An ordinance to impose a Sunday through Saturday juvenile curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in any designated entertainment district within the city, to impose a Sunday through Saturday juvenile curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in any designated park. And I believe the title has changed, right, Tom? That abuts.
I didn't think there was a title change.
I know we changed the body, but it just dawned on me. I'm sorry.
I didn't think the title changed.
I should have already looked at
No, the title didn't change.
that. Huh?
Title didn't change.
It did not? Okay. In any designated city park to declare an emergency and for the purposes first reading.
Move to suspend the rules and place on second reading.
Second.
There's a motion second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
Aye.
Ayes have it, second reading.
An ordinance to impose a Sunday through Saturday juvenile curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in any designated entertainment district within the city, to impose a Sunday through Saturday juvenile curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in any designated park, to declare an emergency, second reading.
Move to suspend the rules and place on third and final reading.
There's a motion second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say aye.
Aye.
Please say nay. Ayes have it, third reading.
An ordinance to impose a Sunday through Saturday juvenile curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in any designated entertainment district within the city, to impose a Sunday through Saturday juvenile curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. in any designated city park, to declare an emergency, third and final reading.
We've now had 3 readings. Any questions from members of the board? Any questions from members of the board? Madam Clerk, do we have anything from the community?
No. No, sir.
Nothing from members of the community?
No, sir.
All right. We've now had 3 readings. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say
Aye.
nay.
Nay. What, I'm sorry, Mayor and public, what, are we voting on the curfew now?
On the third reading.
There was no discussion?
We're voting on the ordinance. We've read it 3 times.
Right.
Well, I hate to hold us up, but I'm just walking in, I will vote no, because I don't know what's going
Point of order, Mayor. Point of order.
on. I hear you, Director. Go ahead, Mayor. I vote no.
Point of order, Mayor.
Director Hines?
No, we've had a motion and a second, and we are on the vote. You have asked for discussion. That has not happened.
That wasn't the question, Director Hines, just so you know. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
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 Ayes have it.
Well, I guess, Mayor, we had an opportunity
There's
prior to.
also, 1 second, Director Richardson, there's also an emergency clause. All those in favor of the emergency clause,
Aye.
say aye. All those opposed,
Nay.
ayes have it. Director Richardson,
Well, I guess I should have, when you open it up prior to us taking the vote, it's somewhat disconcerting that we called an emergency meeting to discuss this, and that I was expecting some kind of presentation or some kind of information. To my knowledge, there's been no data, no research-based information that's been shown to us to justify the adoption of this ordinance, and reluctantly kept quiet.
Point of order, Mayor.
Kept quiet, Lance.
Point of order, Mayor. There has been a vote taken. We ask for a ruling from the chair.
Director Hines, I understand that you are here remotely. We've already said the ruling. We're having a discussion at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Director Richardson?
So I was anticipating a presentation from Dr. Compier, so some kind of information, because the impetus for us putting it off for a week was to have more conversation, not just from the community, but among board members as well, as I remember Director Miller pointed out several times. And for me, it's really, really premature to vote on something that I have not seen any information, any data, or any statistics that shows that this issue has been problematic for us from a public safety standpoint, which is what I'm assuming we're connecting it to. And I think it's really, really premature for me to accept this. And I was just trying to explain the rationale for me voting no, Mayor.
Yes, sir. Director Phillips?
And I would have raised my hand, but I'm getting logged on. I want to state for the record and for the public, as I said last week, I was generally supportive. I got here late because my other job obligations, so I voted no. And as I understand from what's in front of me, that this is a 9 p.m. curfew and that we did not change the time. Is that correct, Mayor? It's still 9 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay, so I want the public to know from my standpoint that I was supportive of a curfew downtown. 9 p.m., in my opinion, is just entirely too early to impose a curfew. I mean, people come from out of town, take their kids to dinner at 8, 8:30, or if you're like I was in 17, you go on a date in the summertime and you leave a restaurant at 9 p.m. Now you're in violation of curfew. Seems kind of, what's the right word? Not paternalistic, but there's another word that's sort of like paternalistic, that I think that we are kind of, 9 p.m. is an overreach, and I don't want to be a part. I want the public to know that it wasn't my position to vote on something that have this type of, put that type of parameters on our youth. I don't want us to be considered an unfun city or a city where we're not cognizant of reality as it relates to what people do on a day-to-day basis. So for my constituents who I spoke to about this issue and some who reached out to me via email and text, I was supportive of the curfew in principle, assuming that it was later. I proposed a 10 p.m. curfew. Apparently my colleagues didn't agree with that, so they voted differently. But I wanted to state my piece, Mayor, for the record, on why I voted no on this issue. And I do support the police officers in their recommendation, but 9 p.m. is just, that's too early in the way we live life. I regularly don't eat dinner to 9:30. So I think that was an overreach. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
And Mayor, to me, just
Director Richardson, one second. I got a list of names, Director Hines, then Director Miller, then Director Richardson. Director Hines?
Thank you. Tom, as I understand it, this curfew only applies to entertainment districts and city parks, correct?
That's correct, and it only applies to city parks that abut entertainment districts while those districts are in operation.
Okay, so it's even more restrictive.
Yes.
This is something the community is asking for, and I don't think it's in the least bit restrictive. That if, and Tom, as I understand, if you were a minor with your parents in one of these areas, you would be exempt from this regulation, correct?
Well, it's been a long time since I was a minor, but that's correct. If a minor in the accompaniment of an adult is exempt from the ordinance.
Thank you very much. I'll be supporting this, and I thought we had already taken a vote since we voted on the emergency clause. Thank you.
Director Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, as I was reading this, the ordinance, I was looking at section 1 of this. It talked about, and I saw 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and then the second paragraph talks about 9. So I got a little confused.
Maybe the general counsel or parliamentarian, can you clarify? Is it 10 p.m. or 9 p.m.?
Well, A1 is 10 p.m. to 5, and A2 is 9 p.m. to 5, but A2 only applies to entertainment districts that are operating as an entertainment district, or to a park which abuts an entertainment district that's operating as an entertainment district.
So it's really 10 o'clock
Overall.
isn't it? Okay.
But in areas where the city has allowed people to have mixed drinks walking up and down the street, it's 9 o'clock, if they're unaccompanied by an adult.
So that would be at Soma, which has this once a quarter. Everything else is at 10 o'clock.
Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
And Director Miller, that was the suggestion made by Vice Mayor Webb and was added to the ordinance.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure I understood that.
Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sorry, Director Phillips, Director Richardson.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Phillips. I too, once again, want to point back to the simple fact that we have not seen, and most of the decisions we make based on policies, the policy decisions we make are based on information and research and data. We have not had any data presented to us. Lance said the community's been asking for it. The community that I represent hadn't been asking for it. I hadn't had any phone calls, emails, or text messages about this as I've had about public safety items, whether it's an increase in homicides, an increase in burglaries or robberies. The only information that we've had was an expedited attempt to push this through last week, but there's no data. There's no information that could justify, in my opinion, warrant this overreach. To me, this is a far stretch. I don't know if we have I know we have instruments that can gauge how fast you're going. I don't know if we have cameras or instruments that can gauge the age of young people in the River Market or the young people in the crowd, that you have some kind of gauge you can point, some kind of device you can point and say, oh, she's 16, they're 21, they're 20. I don't know if this is just perception-based reality for some of the folks who are pushing this, or this is a perception that we're having the wrong people there, not particularly age-wise, and we're not bold enough to say it, but we haven't seen any information. No data, no reports, no arrest records, no nothing. We haven't seen it. Not one single solitary piece of information has come from our administrative part of our government, our law enforcement part of our government, our proposed sponsor. Nothing has been presented to me that justifies or warrants this overreach. It's not data-driven as far as I'm concerned. And that's the explanation. That's the reason, Dean, I'm voting no. Not that I don't think conceptually it's a good idea. I'm voting no because I have no information on it. None whatsoever. I don't think any of us has seen anything with respect to an increase in arrests for juveniles in the River Market District or Entertainment District, increase in arrests of juveniles in these areas where we're trying to propose this curfew. I just think it's it's really, really premature and it's ill-fated, and I can't support it without having any information to back it up and document it that warrants this kind of overreach. I mean, it's really, really, I don't want to keep saying overreach, but it's overreach on my part.
Thank you, Director Richardson. Director Phillips, then Director Adcock, then Director Computers.
Thank you, Mayor. And to add to my comments earlier, just to give this some substance, for example, as Director Miller knows, in his ward, Soma has an entertainment district. Loblolly is a part of the entertainment district. If you go to Loblolly's website, they're selling ice cream Friday to Saturday to 10 p.m. So if you're 17 and you go get ice cream in Soma without your parent, are you in violation of the curfew? That doesn't make sense.
If you're with an adult, you're not in violation.
Exactly. I say if you're not with your parent, if you're not with
It's
an
not limited to parents, it's an adult.
okay, if there are no adults around, you're 17, you have your own car, you and your friends say, let's go get some ice cream at Loblolly at 9:15, you violated curfew?
With this ordinance in place.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. And I understand
But how
I'm
is
not
that
questioning you.
How is that any different from not being able to go into the bar area of a restaurant if you're under the age? I mean, it's the same thing. This whole thing is based upon selling alcoholic beverages and being able to carry them in the open in the street. And that's the only justification for it.
I understand what you're saying, City Attorney. I understand we already voted. I'm speaking to my board member colleagues and to the public. And to the public, I want them to understand that I'm against this for this reason. This is an example of this. I understand that Soma is an entertainment district. You can have open containers back and forth when they're exercising on entertainment district. But by what we just voted on, sorry, apparently I just connected. If you go to Loblolly without an adult after 9 p.m., you are in violation of the curfew. That doesn't, to me, to the public, the city of Little Rock, that doesn't make sense. That's why I voted no. That will increase enforcement issues, in my opinion, and that's why I called it overreach. So I wanted the public to be aware of that, why I voted no. Like I said last week, conceptually, I'm agreeable, but I voted no for reasons such as this. And I'm sure there are a number of other examples that I'm not listing today, but here is a very plain one where the solution doesn't fit the problem. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Director Adcock.
Yes, Mayor. I would like the public to know that we did receive several emails today. They was addressed, I believe, to all of the city directors. Also, I have talked to Chief Hilton, and he was available to talk to each director that had questions about this. So I just do not want the public to think that we're sitting here and voting on this without input from the public, because we did get emails all day. Thank you.
Mayor, I was trying to raise my hand.
One second, Director Richardson. It's Director Computers, then we'll go to you.
Thank you. Ken, I think you bring up good points, and Antoine also. But let me give you some background on this. About what, Bruce, a year or two ago, we had a number of youth in the pavilions. We had a shooting. We found out that that was a collection point or a place that people, and you had, no one was seriously injured, but you had groups that were back there fighting and doing all sorts of things. 2 weeks ago, I got a report that there was 150 kids back there. Now, because we have, I think, a very alert, astute chief and assistant chiefs, they recognize the situation. And I sat down with them and said, as I've said before, you know, this is my 25-year-old baby. we're getting into a real problem. And then I started talking to the people on the street that sent y'all letters today. All of them saying that people downtown were causing their business to be harmed. Now, I will tell you, as the mayor was very good about talking to me about, that this is not one group that's causing all the problems. It's the homeless people, it's the caravanners that aren't the people we're talking about. All of these things, but it's like making one of Cappy's great recipes. She doesn't just use the strawberries in her strawberry shortcake. She's got to have a great bread. She's got to have great everything to make it, the whipped cream to make it great. So one of the problems that I think Chief Dyer enumerated to me was we had to do something about this group of people because we have a history of a catastrophe almost happening. We have a situation where people were being dropped off because this was a convenient place to be. And being, I think, superb policemen, they recognize the potential danger of a situation. Now, there's two things that could happen in this situation. One is we could say, we hope we don't, nothing happens. Or we could be proactive about it and try to say that if you have an entertainment district and you have people that are underage, it doesn't mix. It's the same reason we tell people not to drive when they drink. So this was a proactive step based on the history of what had happened before. Now, are there a lot of police reports that tell you that there's a bunch of fights in the pavilions or in the park? No. Are there a lot of restaurants that tell you that people come by there and harass their customers? Yes. Are there a lot of different problems that are going on, whether you're talking about the Heights or Hillcrest or Southwest Little Rock? Yes. But this is one thing we could do proactively before we had a tragedy. And I will tell you, 100, 150 kids downtown with nothing to do, not being able to go into any of the establishments that are there, are a potential hand grenade that someone's going to pull the pin one day and it's going to go off. I don't want it to. I think that the businesses are being hurt by all the things that are going on with the interstate and everything else. And so to me, this is a very sane, proactive step. To Antoine's question about the 10 o'clock curfew, 9 or 10 o'clock, my inclination is we try it for a month or two. If we want to change it, we can come back and amend this. There's nothing that says that this is, Moses didn't bring this down from the mountain and say this is what it is. There's no stones here. So we're not locked into this. But all I can see when I got a call that there's 150 kids back there is that we had a shooting, no one got hurt, no one got killed. We have fights back there all the time. It's harassing businesses and hurting businesses. So is this too restrictive? Maybe, but we voted on it. I want to give it a try for a minute and let's see what happened. But you're right, there's nothing that says, but the reason there isn't is that the police are real good at saying to the kids, go home, get out of here. We're not going to arrest you. We're not going to take you downtown. And I think that you have to give the police in the River Market lots of credit for being using great discretion in what they're doing. And I appreciate what they're doing. But I also appreciate the fact that they're coming forward and saying, this is a powder keg. We don't have the people to take care of it. We don't have the way of taking care of it. You're mixing people with alcohol, with underage people. And that's the reason that I brought this forward. So there it is. And I can't in good faith vote to let the situation be perpetuated and have a tragedy and then come back and say, oh my God, we should have done something. So that's my stance. So if you want to know how this came up, there it is. That's my rationale for it. Is it the whole problem? Again, no, it isn't. But it is one thing we can easily address and take care of that I think adds safety and security downtown, and it gives people the reassurances they can come downtown.
Well, Dean, I thank you for that, and I understand that, and I know you know that I used to work when the city first started gang intervention programs. I coordinated them, and I'm fully aware of how something as slight as a mislook of looking at somebody in a different way or saying the wrong kind of word in a large group of young people can be a trigger. And unbeknownst to you, Dean, you were the impetus for me deciding to run for city board in 2006, partly because of what I saw in terms of the redevelopment downtown, and I saw how that was done, and I saw development out west, and I saw this big, huge place in the middle that some of us, John, call inner city. There's nothing inner about it, but it's a big hole. And that was the impetus for the 12th Street revitalization project. And you were the impetus for me deciding to run because I saw what you did and how you guys work with Future Little Rock and how that resulted in some funding, not only for more law enforcement, but for community-based providers, faith-based providers, programming within those places we call inner city. Okay. Joan, I think your comment was directed there. I'm not saying we didn't get any information. We did get some emails. You're correct, we did. But there were people who had businesses within the River Market District. I know that the chief and his team, they're supportive of it, but we have not seen any data. I trust in our police department. I trust in their ability to gauge and analyze situations, but we haven't seen any information that warrants this leap, this giant leap. That's what I'm saying. And particularly in light of sometimes when we talk about the issues up here, the issue is not the message, it's the messenger. I wonder, really, if I would have been given that same kind of deference, if I proposed something similar in another part of the city that had the same kind of impact that we're talking about. There's plenty of places in our city that has large congregation. And then you correctly mentioned when we talked about caravanning, you said, I said it was in wards 1, 2, 6, and 7. You said it's all over. I agree it's all over. But let's look at where it's concentrated. Let's ask our police department to tell us where is it concentrated. Let's look at drive down the streets and look at where you have the most skid marks, tire marks. They're concentrated in certain parts. Crime is all over the city, but it's concentrated in certain parts of the city. And I believe we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We have not seen, Joan, any criminal data. We have not seen any arrest information. We have not seen anything that I think would be warranted for us to take this large of an approach. And I believe that had I presented something similar, I would have been expected to provide reports and analysis, and here's what's happening, here's how the arrest rates increased by this percentage, but in this age group, this percentage in this age group, this census tract. I just think that for me, it's really, really a big jump to go without any kind of information. I value your judgment. I value your expertise, your intellect. I value your experience, and I value your concern about the city, the entire city. I value that. For me, valuing that doesn't necessarily make you correct, absolutely correct, in that there's ways we could have worked this into what we're trying to do. I think that it was something that felt like it was rushed. It was thrown at us, shoved at us, go ahead and do this real quick. You guys moved on. We hadn't done any research. We hadn't looked at similar situated cities or other parts of the country or other parts of entertainment districts that are facing these types of issues. I know the danger of having a large group of people, young people, congregating. I've seen that. I've witnessed that. I've been shot at before. Probably more times, Chief Dyer, than most of our police officers when I was doing gang-based, street-based crisis intervention. So I understand what you're saying. You're absolutely correct. I don't want that to happen. I don't want us to have anything, because I think we've done a wonderful job of bringing downtown back to life. And that was the impetus for me deciding to run for city board, and the impetus for me deciding to utilize that approach to do the 12th Street Corridor Revitalization Project, where not only we were focusing in on infrastructure revitalization, but we're looking at human capital revitalization as well. Somebody called me, tell me to be quiet. It's my mom. That's it, Mayor.
All right, I think we have Director Adcock, then Director Hines, then Director Phillips.
No, I've already spoke.
Is your hand still up, Director Adcock?
There.
Took yours down?
I've got down.
All right, Director Hines, then Director Phillips.
I motion to adjourn.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say
Aye.
nay.
Discussion? Can I have discussion? I guess point of order for the parliamentarian. Can I
Parliamentarian.
have discussion on the motion to adjourn?
It is a debatable motion.
Can you share with everyone what that means before I?
Oh, it means that you can have discussion.
All right. Director Hines, do you still?
I'll withdraw my motion if Director Phillips is the last one to speak.
So you're withdrawing your motion to adjourn, and just from the parliamentarian standpoint, the point of order from Director Phillips was to do discussion that was debatable. But now, Director Hines, just so I'm clear, you're now withdrawing that motion.
If the second withdraws it.
We need to have a second from Director Hines' motion to withdraw. Is there a second?
A second.
There's a second from Director Peck, as well. I saw the hand of Director Adcock. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Director Hines, your hand is still up. Do you have any comment, or do you want to go to Director?
Mayor, I'm sorry, just so the record is straight, because Director Hines withdrew the motion and Director Adcock seconded the motion, as did Director Peck, about the same time, and they all withdrew it, the motion's withdrawn. You didn't actually have to take a vote to withdraw it. I'm sorry, I did not make that clear.
Thank you, Mr. Parliamentarian. Director Phillips?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to, and again, I apologize for getting in here late, but I know last week I had some people ask me some questions, and if y'all discussed this before I got here, I apologize. But my first question is for the city attorney. There were some of the businesses that asked me whether the proposed ordinance essentially had exceptions for people who are working. My understanding that it does, even though it's not listed in this proposed ordinance, is part of the existing code. For the sake of the public and those reporting on this, can you confirm that there is a work exception in this ordinance?
Right, if this was not the amendment of one subsection of the ordinance, then it would be necessary to have all of these provisions in there. The exceptions are in there. People who are working, even if it comes to a problem of conflict with the curfew ordinance, are given 45 minutes to get home.
I think that's important to share. I had people ask me about their kids who work at certain places and whether they would be in violation of the ordinance just by leaving work. So thank you for that clarity, and I hope that is shared with the media. And then lastly, I just want to say this, Mayor, in response to Director Compeers, I agree and appreciate the concern, but I wrote down what you said, Director Pierce. You said we have a bunch of folks down there with places that they can't get into at a certain time. Well, at 9 p.m., you can get into a lot of places without being 21. Loblolly, Fine Fish, Sonny Williams, Cash. There are places to get into at 9 o'clock if you're not 21 because they still serving food. So again, just for the sake of the public, my desire would have been have a curfew that ended after the restaurant stopped serving food, where it was clear if you were underage, there was nothing else for you to do downtown but engage in alcohol, and you're not allowed to do that. Again, that's just, I want to reiterate, this is a step too far. And I understand that we can do this for a month and then come back and fix it, but why come back and fix it? Why not just fix it now, would be my question to my colleagues. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Director Phillips. Seeing no other comments from members of the board, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned. We're now into our agenda meeting for the June 20th agenda. Members of the board, any questions on the consent agenda 1 through 12? Any questions on the consent agenda 1 through 12? Any questions on the consent agenda 1 through 12? Any questions on the consent agenda 1 through 12? All right, well now, planning and development items, any questions on 13 through 19? Any questions on 13 through 19? Any questions on 13 through 19? Looks like we may get out. All right.
Yes.
All
right, Director Phillips.
And I guess this will require a presentation from Director Collins. Well, hold up, that's not number 19. I was going to ask about the short term. I'm early, Mayor, I'm sorry.
All right, we're moving from 13 through 19.
Mayor? my hands-
Director Adcock?
Yes, item number 18, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Item number 18.
Yes.
What's your question?
Okay, this mobile home is going into the county, but the county area that this is going into is in College Station, which is the area very close to the city limits. Do we have any plans of annexing this area into the city? Because if we do not allow mobile homes in the city, so I would wonder why we would allow one so close to the city limits if we have plans to annex it.
Director Collins, if you'll come in briefly.
Mr. Collins, this mobile home is going into College Station, which is right close to the city limits sign. Yeah, are there any plans to annex this area into the city? Because we do not allow them in the city, so I would hate to have one that we have just put in a place that we're going to annex.
Yes, Director, I understand. And no, there is not current plans for the city to annex College Station in. And if you look at the zoning exhibits that we had, there is manufactured homes in College Station at this point in time in that location. It's not dominant, but it is a percentage of manufactured home in those lots that have been placed there over the years. So it is not uncommon for this to occur in that area.
When we're annexing out in the county, do we notify the county judge?
Excuse me, I didn't hear the last part.
Okay, when we are annexing out into the county because of extraterritorial, do we notify Judge Hyatt?
Yes, that is the process. The annexation first has to start with the state. The GIS, they essentially confirm that it is a contiguous to the cities, not creating an island. Once that is done, then that goes to the county judge. And once Judge Hyatt approves it, then it comes to us. So we do not see it until the county judge approves that annexation.
So we get a written approval from the county judge?
So we could have what?
Do we get a written approval?
Yes, we do get a written. The applicant brings that to us. So it is their responsibility to put that together in a package and bring that to us.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Warwick?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't believe this is in Ward 7.
It's a mistake.
We'll get it changed.
Okay.
All right. Board members, anything?
I'm not through. I was just to follow up with Joan and that it's not really Ward 7. I'd like a presentation on items 15 and 19 from our planning director.
We could bring up the zoning map for item 15.
And Jamie, I think you do need to clarify, manufactured homes are allowed in Little Rock.
Yes, that's a good point, Bruce. They are allowed in certain zoning criteria. There's R7 and R7A. One is a manufactured home subdivision, and the other is a single manufactured home on a single lot. type development. So it has to be approved zoning for it to be in that location. It can also be allowed as a conditional use permit in, I believe, R4 zoning or R3 zoning. So there is criteria that a manufactured home can be allowed in the city. So it is not that it's banned totally in the city. There is zoning criteria for it.
Thank you.
So, Director Wyrick, this is off of, was that Colonel Glenn Road? I'm sorry, couldn't see, zoomed in a little bit. It's an existing planned office development. So this is 4213, that's called the Bowman Plaza POD, done back in 2008 and amended there shortly after. What the applicant is looking to do is to allow an event center and a portion of their operation for it. I'll just read the purpose and the reason that they had stated down there in the write-up. The purpose for changing the current zoning to include event center is to allow Brandon House to operate as an assembly that includes a state-of-the-art theater to train some of the most high-risk students in the state that haven't been given adequate access to artistic, vocational, or academic programming using a state-of-the-art theater, an art gallery funded in part by Wingate Foundation for aspiring youth and young adults to display and showcase their arts in the community gallery, and an assembly space that is used for public performances, educational retreats, educational classrooms, and cultural events to include, but not limited to, concerts, banquets, business meetings, weddings, conferences, business expos, small community conventions, and other special events. Their administrative hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for that location. They are going to require that all events end by 11:59 p.m., so right before midnight.
So this is the Tisdale Group, right, that's doing this?
That's operating that, yeah. So it's on an arterial street, pretty close to the interstate. This is not a location that would not be able to house an event center. It's right off the interstate. It's something that would be a good location for that. That's why staff
So
supported it.
in the city limits? I'm following the lines and I'm
Yes, we are in
having
the city
trouble
limits.
figuring that out, if it is or if it is not in the city limits.
Yes, it is in the city limits.
Okay. Okay, the other item was item number 19.
We could bring up the zoning map. And zoom in a little bit so we can kind of see where some of this is located at. This is off of Colonel Glenn Road, and what they're looking to do is provide a auto body shop facility. They're going to split it into 2 lots after the rezoning. There'll be 2.26 acres that are on the west that will remain undeveloped at this time, and the rest will be the auto body shop on there. And if you look at some of the industries that an auto body shop would be allowed in, I-2 is just directly to the east of that and south of that, and then you also have I-1 to the west of that. And it also is pretty close to the interstate too, just a little bit further to the west of that. In this application, they also are looking to request a waiver of the location of the driveways because they're less than 300 feet apart, and it's just because of the location on their site that they're looking to do for that property. And staff was supportive of that. There was no registered objectors that spoke in opposition at the Planning Commission, and this was a Planning Commission that we had a lot of absentees, but there was 6 commissioners available and they voted for it. It was on the consent agenda and therefore was not pulled.
Actually thought these were in Ward 7, but I see they're in Ward 6, so sorry about that.
No
Maybe you got
problem.
some information you didn't have before. Okay, And I have questions on 23 and 24, but you're not to that point, Mayor, so I don't know if anybody else has anything or not.
Yes, I have a question on 22.
22?
Yes. Have we sent notices out to all of the people that showed up for the evening when we discussed this, that this is now back on the agenda? And do we have something that we can send to them to show what changes have been made?
There has not been notifications sent out, and I'm assuming that you're talking about the sign-up sheet that everybody was at that May meeting that was on there. No, those notifications has not went out to those. We can send those out, and we will attach all the modifications that was made
I
today.
think that evening, we told the people that we would notify them when this came back up and that we would tell them what changes have been made. So before next week, I would like to make sure that a notice goes out to each person that attended that meeting and that all changes that have been done from the first time to now are noted on them.
Yes, ma'am, we will do that. Just to note that I only have the email addresses, and if there is legible other, actually addresses on there other than emails, we'll send that out to that location.
If you give me those sheets, and if you cannot read the address, I'll be happy to research it and see if I can find them.
I will get that to you tomorrow.
But I think that since we told them, and there were several of us there, that we was going to come back and let them know what changes you was going to make, and that they would be notified when the board was looking at it.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I'll prepare a
And if we
summary and
can't do
attach
it
it and
in
send
one
it out.
week, maybe we need to defer this for 2 weeks until we make sure that we've got the notification out. Thank you, Mayor.
Are you making that suggestion? I don't, could you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
Yes, the suggestion was that we told the individuals that evening that we would contact them when this came back before the board, and secondly, that they would receive all changes that is going to be made, so that if they do not agree with it, they can come before us next week. And if this cannot be done in the 1 week time, then we need to defer this for 2 weeks until we can notify everyone.
Well, unless other board members want to defer, we deferred this umpteen times. I think what we'll do, Director Adcock, is we'll make certain that one, we'll send some type of a press notice via social media, via media, and we'll figure out what's the best route. That'll be number one. Those who left their email addresses, we'll send something to them on that list that you were in attendance. We'll do that this week from that standpoint. I don't think we'll do all that before next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Phillips, is your hand up?
I just want clarity from Director Collins. Did you, in the conversation with Director Adcock, did you say you did make changes since that May meeting, or you did not?
Yes, we did. We made
Okay,
changes.
and you will get us a summary of that?
Yes, so
those
we'll
changes?
provide a summary for all the changes that was done since the Planning Commission approval.
Okay, that's why I wanted clarity on. Thank you. That's all, Mayor.
All right. Board members, any questions on 23 and 24? Director Wyatt?
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 23 is kind of a strange ordinance, I think. Could somebody describe to me what we're doing with that? I think we already have an improvement district and we're moving these lots into an improvement district, or I'm not exactly sure what that one is. And item 24, we're bad about setting up these improvement districts, but we don't tell where they are. And I'm sorry, but I can't read meets and bounds to understand the location, so I'd like to know where this Carter Lane Improvement District is.
Director Collins?
Mayor, those really go to the city attorney's office and not to the planning department. So
They're drafting, okay, you're right. Thank you for that clarification. City Attorney?
Director Warwick, in terms of 24, the documents are sent to the clerk's office and sent up to us to see if they are correct. I do not go back and check all of the discussion on the meets and bounds, mainly because somebody is certified that they're correct, that knows how to do that. And then once that happens, the ordinance and such, which are usually prepared by the improvement district, we look at to see if it meets the statutory requirements, and if it does, it comes forward. The statute demands that it come forward within a relatively short period of time. So I can't tell you today where Carter Lane Improvement District is. What I can say is that I'll get with Public Works, where all the people really know how to do that, and we'll get a map out to everyone.
Well, I found a Carter Lane. It's off of Taylor Loop Road. I don't know if that's the correct location or not, but it would be very helpful if we knew where these improvement districts were when they come forward. The other one is item 23, and I think maybe we already had an improvement district, and we're adding these lots into that improvement district, but it talks about annex lots. So I'm not sure what 23 is doing.
When we approve an improvement district, we actually lay it out, which is a weird phrase that probably goes back somewhere around King John and the 1200s, but laying it out means actually laying it out on the map. This is where it is. That's a property body that is subject to a levy to help pay for the improvements that the district is created to do. You can't charge other places unless they're a part of that, so that's where the annexation comes into the district. And I think you're right, that these are simply 3 lots that they're going to put in the district.
Because it talks about annexation and Taylor Park subdivision, and it's kind of confusing, but that's what it's already in the city. It's just that these were left out of the municipal improvement district, and now we're annexing them into the improvement district.
That's what I understand.
It caused some confusion for some people that live in that area. He's the attorney for the,
And Tom, Sean worked on both of these, so he would, I'm sure has been in contact with legal counsel. We only get the.
We'll get those questions answered and get that a note to Director Warwick.
Mayor, I think this gentleman is wanting to speak on that.
No, sir. No, sir, we don't do that during our agenda, man. Thank you. All right. We'll now go into our, Director Warwick, your hand still up?
no, I just took it down. Thank you.
All right, just want to make sure.
Done.
Want to make sure every board member's voice is heard.
That.
All right. We'll now have our CFO, Sarah Linehan.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the board. I'm here to present the financials for 2023 through February. These were distributed before the last board meeting. You made a motion to approve them at the last board meeting, but I'm here to present them tonight. So on the first slide, you'll see that through February, just 1/6 or 2/12 of the budget would be 16.47% of our revenues. Through the end of February, we had actually received 18.33% of our revenues compared to 15.47 in the same period a year ago. On the next slide, you'll see that, again, 1/6 of the budget for revenues, and this is operating revenues, would be $39,863,742. We had received $43,849,565, compared to $34,052,224 a year ago. So we're approximately $3.99 million, almost $4 million above the adopted budget, and about $9.8 million above the same period a year ago. And so now I'm going to show you that by category. So most of this is due primarily to the timing of our revenues. We receive our property tax revenues. Approximately 40% of those are received in the first quarter of the year. We receive about 43% of those in the fourth quarter of the year, and the remaining 17% is spread out through the remainder of the year. And that's just coinciding with the timelines that they are due to the county, which then turns around and remits them to us. So that variance is a timing issue. There's also another factor that I'll discuss on the next slide. Are the other large variances in licenses and permits, and as you're aware, about $6.8 million of the total annual licenses and permits budget is associated with business licenses, and those are due annually on the first of the year, and so they're collected at the very beginning of the year. The other revenues are related to planning permits and our mixed drink permits that are more ratable throughout the year, but the large favorable variance at the beginning of the year is due to business licenses. And then the large negative variance is associated with intergovernmental revenues. Those are the pension turnback funds that are distributed by the state annually in July. As we move to the next slide, you'll see the variance compared to the same period a year ago. So you'll see that property taxes is $6.2 million above the same period a year ago. While we did have an increase in the original charge, which is the assessment for 2022 to be collected in 2023, that was 10.1% higher than the same period a year ago. But the big variance is because the county this year issued their billing. They billed a month earlier than they have traditionally done. And so those escrowed accounts with your mortgage companies and things, the property taxes were actually paid a month earlier. And so we just collected those earlier this year. The overall annual budget will not change. It was just timing for receiving those earlier. We've already spoken about the major variances. I'll go into detail on utility franchise fees a little bit more in a moment. So now on our property taxes, this is a rolling 24-month, or excuse me, sales taxes. This is a rolling 24-month look at our sales tax collections. You'll see at the very beginning of the graph, we were having 30% growth, and that was really comparing 2021 to the height of the pandemic the year before. And so as businesses reopened, you know, we saw those really, really high growth rates as things came back. You'll see that it gradually kind of settled down to where in August 22, there was very little growth. And then we saw in the fourth quarter of last year an increase again that got us back up around the 10% range. At the very end of the year, and in this graph where it shows February 23, that actually relates to December 22 revenues. That's the month it's collected in February, but it's the revenue for the period 2 months before. So January and February of 23 are in that circle area. And year to date, our January sales tax revenue was 10.41% above the same period a year ago. February was 12.08% above the same period a year ago. Year to date, that blended rate is 11.24%. Now, there is inflation obviously has played a factor in the growth in our sales tax revenues, but they have continued to increase now that we are also including the tax on internet sales. I will tell you that over the rolling 12-month period, the growth is 5.9%. So on the next slide, we show just that 12 months and the blended rate, and I've already gone over those variances, but you can see the blue line there kind of tracks the rolling 12-month growth, and at the end of February, that was 5.9%. and your individual monthly growth in January and February was just over 10% and just over 12%. So year-to-date, when you're looking just at how we would, rather than looking at 1/6 of the annual budget, but looking at sales tax the way it typically tracks, through the end of February, we were about almost 1.8 million above our original forecast for revenues through this period. We had anticipated around 2% growth, and we still expect there's talk that there could be a slight recession. There could be some things on the horizon. So I don't want to do a lot to adjust our annual forecast just yet, but we can true things up for what we've seen year to date when your next CFO comes forward with a budget amendment later in the year. So on the next slide, you've got our electric franchise fees. We get our annual budget estimates directly from the utility, and we do not incorporate any rates that have not yet been approved by the Public Service Commission. So Entergy's estimate for the year was 2.3% annual growth. You'll see that the usage in January and February actually declined about 1.8%, but the revenues increased 13.18%. And that has to do, I think, with some storm recovery riders and some other things that were attached to that. But it's too early in the year to make any kind of an adjustment for the annual revenues. On the next slide, you'll see our gas franchise fees. Here, the gas franchise fees usage actually increased 9.7% approximately. The revenue increased 19.55%. They have recently announced the rate would be declining for, I believe that was beginning in May. But they had estimated annual growth of 7.13%. And so to date, we are exceeding that. Now we'll move on to our expenditures. So again, 1/6 of the annual budget would be 16.67%. Our actual expenditures through February were at 15.15% of the annual budget compared to 14.63% the same period a year ago. The blue line is the current 2023 percentage, so you'll see it's very closely aligned with the same period a year ago. From an dollar expenditure standpoint, we had expended $34.5 million. The 1/6 of the annual budget would have been $37.9 million, and compared to $30.9 million the same period a year ago. So we're approximately $3.4 million below budget, just on a pure percentage basis, but we're about $3.6 million above the same period a year ago. And again, we'll look at variances by department on the next slide. Okay, let's see here. I went too far. Whoops. Okay. So really, the only department on this slide that met the thresholds for explanation was information technology, but we'll talk a little bit about executive administration too, because that's always of interest. The favorable variance in executive administration is primarily due to the timing of our actuarial contributions for the closed non-uniform pension plan and other post-employment benefit plan. Those are generally paid later in the year. So we always see a favorable variance in the beginning of the year. Information technology, approximately $359,000 of their $447,000 favorable variance is due to the timing of recurring software and hardware maintenance contracts. They also had savings from 6 authorized but vacant positions that contributed about $65,000 to the favorable variance, and the remaining $22,485 was associated with the timing of contract expenditures. On the next slide, we'll go to line 15. With the River Market, we do not have the River Market. While we have a favorable variance there, only 1 month of activity is actually showing rather than 2. Like the city, the River Market is focused in the first quarter on getting their annual audit out, and so we are a little bit delayed in receiving information, but that will be reflected in your next report. The next lines that as a percentage have a variance that needs explanation, or really the principal on the debt. And you'll recall that last year, all of our annual short-term financing notes, they're paid annually on the date of their anniversary. And so most of our annual short-term financing notes are payable in August. And then this year, we did issue a short-term note very early in January, but the payment on that, the very first payment, will not be until next year's budget. And then for vacancy savings, for the year, we estimated $7 million in vacancy savings, which is approximately 3.7% of the personnel budget, and that's for anticipated turnover in positions. And so through the end of February, we had actually experienced $2.3 million in vacancy savings, but you don't see that ever as an actual expenditure. You see the portion of the annual budget that remains as a variance because the individual department budgets are reduced for the vacancies within that department so that they're not allowed to expend those funds on anything else until that vacancy goal is achieved for turnover. On the next line, you'll see again that $7 million adopted budget, again representing 3.7% of fully funded personnel costs. So that's a turnover estimate. And then we had, because of the number of vacancies, actually achieved $2.3 million through the first 2 months of the year. There were 221 budgeted vacant positions unfilled in the general fund as of the last pay period in February. There were an additional 99 unfilled positions in the street and enterprise funds for a grand total of 320 authorized but unfilled positions. And then on the vacation and sick payout report, we budgeted an estimated $1.75 million for payouts for employees that retire or sever employment that have accrued leave balances. And through the end of February of that estimate, we had paid out $383,718. So on the next slide, you see kind of the trend for vacant positions over the last 12 months. And so I will say that of the 221 vacant positions, as of the last payroll in February, there were 94 that were uniform police positions. 1 was the deputy chief, 2 were assistant chiefs, 4 lieutenants, 5 sergeants, and 82 police officers. At the very end of February, we had a recruit class that started. And as of the most recent, I ran this as of, as of June 9th, which was last Friday, there were 81 uniform vacancies. So we had decreased 13, and that still includes the deputy chief, less an overfilled assistant chief. Then we have 4 vacant lieutenants, 6 sergeants, and 71 officers. And that does include the 34 that are in the recruit school right now. And that really concludes the overall picture of the general fund through the end of February. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Sarah. And also just for the record, as Sarah shared, I believe we have 80 vacancies in the police department. We have another recruit class of about 22 to 24, and then we're working on some laterals. So by the end of the year, we'll be at right at 50 vacancies, which is remarkable. So kudos to the recruitment team at LRPD to get us where we are now, but we'll be somewhere around 50 towards the end of the year. Director Adcock?
Yes, on page 15, Sarah. Can you give us a breakdown of the departments with the 221 vacancy positions unfilled?
I don't have that detail handy with me, but I will tell you it is, other than the largest portion that I mentioned being in police, they are throughout the city. There is a nationwide issue trying to fill governmental positions.
You know how many of those we have advertised at this time?
Everything is advertised at this time.
Well, they open and then they close. Once there's enough applicants, we review applicants. If there aren't satisfactory applicants, then we reopen. We found that if we leave them posted too long, they don't get as much traction. There's not as much interest. And so we close, interview the applicants we've received, and if there aren't viable applicants, then we put it back out again.
Okay, thank you.
Director Wyatt? Your hand's not up. All right. I think we'll now start with the renters' rights discussion.
On front of each of your, or at each of your places, there's a memorandum handed out by me that basically tries to deal with this in a series of questions. Director Phillips asked for what can we do, and I was working on it and ready to give it, and then got sick, and then I'm going to tell you a little story. When I was at law school in Fayetteville, I was always amazed by the architecture students because they would work all semester on their projects and then 2 days before tear it up and start over again from scratch. And there's sort of an element of that there. Instead of this being a list of ordinances and statutes and constitutional principles on what goes with property, it's really a number of questions I think the board needs to answer before we get into the weeds as to how we wish to accomplish things. Because to me, the big fun issue is, what do you want to fund? I mean, and it's sort of like you go to the car dealership and they ask if you want to buy a luxury car, or if you want to buy something to get to work on. There are problems that we have. There are statutes that allow us to do things on property and like cut grass and then get liens. And then after the liens are not paid, we can move to foreclose. But I kind of outlined briefly that that's really not a very productive way to help finance these things. In the first place, a lot of the properties that we have to deal with do not have a clear title in somebody's name and are referred to as heir property, which means that it's sort of passed from family member to family member, and if that's gone 2 or 3 times, it can go from 1 or 2 people own the property to 60 or 70 people own the property, and we don't even know where they are. So we get a basic title search done, and that costs so much. If we think we want to go after it, we try to get a more expensive title search done, and then we got to find everybody. And we've got to use all reasonable means to do so, or we violate the due process clause of the Constitution. And then it's over $100 to file the lawsuit to do it. A lot of times there's not people around, but even if we find them, we find out that there's a bunch of other liens in front of us: mortgages, failure to pay child support, criminal penalties, federal taxes, and state taxes. We're at the bottom of the list. And so then the question becomes, do we pay $1,000 or $2,000 or more to collect a couple of $100, or do we just report the lien to the county and hope that maybe when it gets certified to the state, something will happen, it'll be sold, and we'll get some proportional amount? And that's sort of what happened. So the idea that we're going to go out there and do things and fix things and all and get the money back is really not a sustainable approach. And so the first question I asked on the second page of the memorandum is, does the city wish to recoup cost or to provide habitable housing? In Arkansas, there is no warranty of habitability for renters. It's been tried several times to get through the legislature, and it has failed. The other types of warranties that most property owners have do not apply to renters. I don't know the real reason for that, but I suspect that part of it is that Arkansas is substantially an agrarian state. And a property rule for a multi-acre cotton field doesn't translate to a property rule for an apartment or a single dwelling or such. And I think that that has been one of the problems. So the first question I ask is, what do you want? We've got a statute that says we can go in and repair something. We've got the ordinances in place. It's very clear that we can go in on nuisance type things, tall grass, open water, trash, and so forth. And there's a general comment in there about other city ordinances, which triggers our being able to go in and deal with the types of things that come up from the various building codes, utility codes, and such that change from time to time. But the real question is, if the city wants to get aggressive in this area to help the people that are renters, particularly those that are low-income renters, are you willing to pay for it? And that's a much deeper discussion than what I've got here. It's just to outline to you what the problem is. The second problem is, are we willing to assist family dwellings and bring them up to modern code? Now, here's where that comes into play. An apartment complex is built in 1965. It complies with all of the codes the city has. In 2020, it has a problem, and instead of being required to come up to the 1965 code requirements that it was at, and may not have ever been changed, it's got to come up to the 2020 code requirements. In one of the properties that we're dealing with now in litigation, we are being informed that it would cost $2 million just to deal with the gas lines, essentially because the gas lines are buried under concrete, which you can't do anymore. You got to be able to access them. And Mr. Collins can tell you that one of the reasons you don't want it done that way is because you can get pools of gas underneath the ground that will ignite and blow up everything. So why the code has changed makes perfectly good sense. But what the impact of the code changing is a question. Now, for many years, Arkansas had this incredibly restrictive provision in the Constitution that was sort of a result of Reconstruction and carpetbaggers running up all kinds of French furniture debts, and partly a problem of a bunch of cities trying to figure out where the Transcontinental Railway was going to go and taking on debt to build stations, figuring if they built the station they would come, and they didn't. That was changed a few years ago to allow for economic development projects to be funded with city monies, even though they may go to individuals. There are steps you have to take that are not outlined in this, but you've got to define what the public project is. You've got to define how it is you're trying to deal with it. But if you're willing to do something like that, why don't we start looking at the idea of, where are our multifamilies? Where are our houses that are for rent? When were they built? When was the code? What code were they built under? Has that changed since they were built? What code would they have to come up to now? And do two things. One, start letting these people know, when you built this thing, you didn't have to have this kind of wire, but now you do. Maybe you want to start it. And two, does the city want to look into the idea that safe multifamily dwellings is a part of our economic development, and we would like to try to enter into some agreements with the property owners to get those changes done, so it's not learning that there's a $2 million bill out there to bring gas lines up to efficiency, but that it's taken care of along the way. We have, in large part thanks to Directors Adcock and Director Miller, long before he was a director, the Targeted Neighborhood Enhancement Act, TNEP, or program. And TNEP grew out of, I think it was Future Little Rock, but it may have been Vision Little Rock, and it was based upon a theory that was coming from other states about being able to provide down payment assistance, being able to use property tax monies to be able to purchase housing or repair housing and such. TNEP has a limit on what can be done now, but essentially up to 50% of the cost of rehabilitating a home or the 50% of the cost of buying a home, constructing a home in a TNEP district, which is defined by statute, and there's certain findings that have to be made, is something a city can do. But if somebody doesn't have the money for the down payment, or they're not going to have the money for that type of repair, what good does it do that you've got a program? Well, borrowing from the federal government's programs, we allow an individual owner who is in the property to pay back the loan by being in the property for a period of 5 years. Initially, the thought was it would be at least 20% so they could avoid some of the insurance, the cost increases for the mortgage, because if you pay 20% down, you avoid them. And Director Miller was the one that pointed out, no, that's not how it works, Tom. If you cut it down by 20% because you provided it, then it's the next 20% that they're going to have taken care of themselves. So we've got TNIP in place, and there should be a way that we could look at the idea of, are there other things we wish to do? Do we need to change legislation? Another problem that we've got is that ever since we have had a division of the district court that deals with code enforcement issues, there has been problems on how we get things resolved. And that's not casting aspersions on any of the judges that we've had. They recognize that we had people, many times elderly, many times on a fixed income, who couldn't repair a porch because they were barely making it on Social Security. So we kind of got into a habit of delaying things and delaying things. In the current situation, we've gotten into the habit of not actually finding anybody guilty, but having them continue to report and continue to report. And so we've had month after month after month after month of reporting, and sometimes there is change and many times there is not. The Arkansas Supreme Court recently decided a case where one of our sister cities was letting somebody sort of plead guilty to a DWI and sort of pay part of a fine and sort of do something else, but never actually being found guilty. And so this person said, well, wait a second, I've never been found guilty. You can't make me pay fees. You can't make me do this. And the Supreme Court said that was correct. So one thing we ought to do is to try to urge that when we bring somebody in for a code enforcement violation, that, you know, we give them a notice, they get 7 days to repair it. If they don't repair it in 7 days, we give them a citation. They come into court and plead not guilty, which may be a week or 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks later. And then a trial will be set after that. And then instead of finding somebody or holding an abeyance of finding, going ahead and making the finding of guilt on the violation, and then the time can be given, but there will be no question that we've got the legal authority to give that time and to follow up on it. The other thing we can do is get the data, you know, which I do not have here, of how many of these are there ways that we can repair by the city with some creative programs. For example, the architecture department of the University of Arkansas has helped build houses, and maybe they could be brought in to help renovate them. But let's look at the city's interest in helping smaller businesses, particularly minority businesses, get started. What are the major drawbacks for them to be major players in the economic market? Well, one is bonding, which comes from history and reputation and making sure everything gets done. All right, we create a program where a house has to be brought up or a duplex has to be brought up to code. We work into a situation where we're bringing forth the money to help do that. We make sure that we get these smaller firms involved, and in the process, not only do we upgrade a house that's habitable, and we have a situation, if it's set up correctly, where we know somebody's going to be there for a 5-year period and increase the stability of the neighborhood, which makes the neighborhood by definition more attractive to others. And we've helped somebody become a business that can get bonded, that has a reputation. For those things where permits are required and people are required to be apprentices or journeymen, the people that can do that, even if some of them have been incarcerated in the past, suddenly have an opportunity to start working for that type of a life. And so that's what I've added. And then the last thing I said is, how bad is the situation? And I don't know, but I know this. I know that we've got a pages system which has parcel information for every parcel in the city of Little Rock. But I don't know that we've got a level on that pages system that could give us a history of every parcel in terms of interactions with code enforcement, interactions with the city, interactions with police, interactions with them, interactions with the fire department. I can say that we had a case in Southwest Little Rock some time ago where the complaint that initially came up is that the dogs were fighting. So that got under our animal code. And then we found out that there were people living there that really weren't supposed to, and some of them were being foster children, fostered by a family that may or may not should have been there. And before it was all over with, police had been there numerous times, animal services had been there numerous times, the Department of Human Services had been there numerous times, and nobody knew this. And yet all of that information could have been put on a pages parcel map, and that could be a basis. Another thing we know is we've got all these incredible cameras at the water department and at the sewer department that go in and find problems with our pipes. But we still come upon situations where we want to work on drainage, we want to work on utility hookups, and we really don't get that information together of where is the best need and should we be using that. And so that's kind of a cooperative effort. That's not lawyers doing something. That's let's use the resources we've got and find out what we can do with it. The thing that kind of brought that the most to mind is we had a house just a few years ago that developed a sinkhole all the way from the street to the front door. And the sinkhole was based in part because of a leaking water line. And, you know, the water line was the responsibility of the owner because it was not from the main, it was from the connection between the main and the house. But why aren't we finding out that these things are there before we get a big sinkhole? And this happened to be at Christmas time, but they always happen on holidays. But shouldn't we, if we've got the technology, get that information and use it? And so I guess essentially what I've got for you today is, before you ask how you're going to do it, you really need to answer what you want to do.
Thank you. Attorney Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to the city attorney for the research, the memo, and the presentation. For my colleagues and the sake of the public, I was the one who requested this policy discussion on this issue and had a few things that I want to discuss with my colleagues and with the city attorney for the benefit of the public. First, I should mention, people reached out to me and said, can I see a copy of the proposed ordinance on the renters' rights? There isn't one. This was intended to be a discussion, and as you heard our city attorney explain, there are some limitations, there are some hurdles that we need to clear to figure out what we can do to better protect our renters in our city, and I think this is the first step for that, for those who are watching. I had a couple big points, city attorney, that I want to address, and then obviously want to hear from my colleagues if they have any. But the primary concern is, we talked about Big Country Chateau a number of times at this board meeting, and I want to know, what do we need to do, or what can we do to ensure that that situation doesn't happen again? I know during the discussions about the litigation, there were some challenges that were faced, and I don't know if those are fixable challenges, city attorney. Or is there something that we can do from a policy perspective at the city board so when citations are issued, you and your team are better equipped to go to court and enforce these actions? Because I think all of us agree what happened to the tenants at Big Country shouldn't happen to anyone else. So what can we do to ensure that that doesn't happen to anyone else? So that's my first question to the city attorney. Is there something we can do to help you in that regard?
I think that, first off, Director Phillips is the one that has asked for this and has worked with me and pushed me to get to this. But The first thing I would say is Big Country is a prime example of what I was talking about in terms of a building that was in shape and up to code when it was built and wasn't when it became a problem. And so when it became a problem and it wasn't up to code and certain things had to be done, they were prohibitively expensive because the clientele for the apartment complex had changed dramatically. And the cost for bringing them up to code was going to be prohibitive. Hence, that's why I suggested the concept of looking at that amendment to Article 12, Section 5, and declaring that safe, reasonable housing and multifamily housing within the city is an economic development project, and then going through the steps that are set forth in the Constitution so that we can, one, start letting the owners, whoever they are, know we're changing the fire code this year. When you built this thing, you didn't have to have sprinklers. Now you've got to have sprinklers every 10 feet. I'm just throwing out something. I don't know that that's what the fire code says, but I know that it talks about those types of issues. And, you know, let's start getting it done. And then the second thing I proposed is, and by the way, for those ones, for the people who are the most vulnerable, do we want to get into a situation where if you will keep this thing up to snuff, we'll help you get these changes made. And if you can't pay for them, we'll let you live them out. So we've got 5 years of an apartment complex that meets all of our standards. It's got people living in it, and we're in good shape. I'm afraid that if we don't have that, what we're going to have is this. We're going to have people that say, I built it in 19 whatever, and this was the code then, and unless I decide to do something or I'm called on the carpet for something, nobody's going to care what it is today. We had that in, I can't remember the name, I think it was the Coachman's, but it was way out in West Little Rock. And, you know, I remember when it was brand new and people would go out there to eat dinners, and the University of Arkansas at Little Rock would put visiting professors up there, and it had a swimming pool and everything else. Then it became less popular for various reasons, and so you had people living in places and they were overloading electrical units with hot plates and with televisions and with other stuff and creating fire hazards. And we couldn't get anybody to do it, and the people that owned it lived in another state. And it had just gotten to the point that to bring the thing up to code was going to be prohibitively expensive. So I think the answer I'm giving to your question is, if we have something that's in that shape and nothing has been done, we're going to be in situations like Big Country Chateau, where whoever bought it last is probably not paying their bill, and whoever they bought it from or a receiver is going to say, let's just get rid of it, and now we've got a blank spot where it's all been torn down because it's cheaper to do that than to make any repairs. And that's why I tried to emphasize the way this is approached as, what do you want? And then it's much easier, I think, to prepare a line of attack if we know exactly what we want and what we're willing to pay for it.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the entire board, but I can speak on behalf of myself. What I want is to make sure that what happened in Big Country doesn't happen again. What I want is for you to have the tools you need when you go to court to enforce citations or violations efficiently and aggressively when they need to be enforced efficiently and aggressively. And if I remember correctly during those conversations, I got the sense that the city attorney's office was essentially handcuffed, for lack of a better phrase, on what it could do to enforce those actions. And that's what I'm trying to get at. So should we take, let me ask it in a different way. Should we take a different perspective? Should we have, and this is coming from the conversations with the housing neighborhood staff, should we have administrative citations so we don't have to go through the court system and we can enforce those things ourselves? And maybe city manager, mayor, do we need to, in November, October, November, increase the budget for the neighborhood and housing staff to have more inspectors available so we can catch things before they're too late. Those are the kind of things I'm talking about for my colleagues and for the city attorney. So I guess more directly to you, city attorney, could we enact a code where we had administrative citations that would allow you or other people to act more quickly without having to go through environmental court?
I don't know how we could. I mean, we've got the Supreme Court of Arkansas saying that an enforcement code for not having a covered light switch is entitled to a 12-man jury trial because it's penal in nature. Whether you could create some sort of ombudsman type situation where people would get together and try to negotiate it, maybe that would be possible. But the one thing I did mention is that we've got to get out of this not making a finding in terms of violation, making that guilty finding or accepting that nolo plea and entering it, which is treated as a guilty plea, as you know, and then, you know, start following up aggressively to do it. But you've got to answer the question. I mean, we've got different kinds of people that are doing things, but we've got a lot of people who have structures that are not up to code and just really can't afford to change that. I mean, that's not going to change whether we have an administrative body or a legal body.
I understand that, but I guess I'm kind of more concerned about people in multifamily housing where they don't own the building. There's some individual entity that owns it. And what happened in Big Country Chateau, that a lot of those places weren't up to code and people were living in substandard conditions. And people were calling, emailing us saying, what can we do to help them? Right, I know it's out of state owners, but they're in Arkansas, so I want to know what can we do? And I don't know if the city attorney is saying there's nothing else we can do other than ask the court to make rulings. Is that what I'm hearing? And I'm not criticizing. I don't know, and I'm asking.
I think the thing I'm saying is find out what you want to do, but recognize that getting the money to do it is the be all and end all. And if there is not a program in place to do that, then nothing gets fixed.
I think the city manager wants to chime in.
And you all get these calls often, and the city attorney is right that there's a lot of reporting that goes on in environmental court. But there is another mechanism, and we've utilized it before, and it's to file these cases in circuit court, which gets it out of environmental court. And that's what's frustrating, that we don't use that mechanism at all, really. I think we've utilized it one time. We're very successful. But that's the challenge. There are structures. I get a list at least every 6 months about the number of cases that and the time they've been in court. The vice mayor is dealing with one that, I mean, it's terrible. And it's very visible right off Cantrell. And basically, we were told, don't bring it back. And so it's frustrating to Brian and his staff, because more than likely, especially dealing with structures, when you all get a call or we get a call, they're already in some process. But that's what's the frustrating thing about it is for the staff. And, you know, Director Phillips, I appreciate the thought about additional staffing. And, you know, we do have a systematic code system in place, but, you know, I think the real issue from the staffing standpoint is once they do get something, once they are cited, nothing happens. And that's what's frustrating. It's frustrating not only the staff, but the neighbors that you hear from constantly. And that's a challenge.
So, and I guess I should have started here, but I appreciate that, City Manager. So to level set for everyone's watching, we would have our staff inspect a place. If it's not meeting our code of habitability that we have in Little Rock City Code, we issue a citation. Then it's my understanding that we go to environmental court. If I'm hearing you correctly, we also have the option to go to circuit court, and we don't usually use that option. Did I explain that fairly accurately?
Correct.
So I guess then the question to the city attorney, can we help us understand why we go to environmental court as opposed to circuit court, and what benefits they have compared to the other?
The ones we take to circuit court, and we've taken some directly, they're usually drug houses, which has a special statutory scheme that deals with that. There are often other factors, but, you know, part of what you've got in environment, well, take Big Country. If we walk through an apartment in Big Country, or big, you know, in an apartment, we're going to be able to see that, gee, there's water leaking and there are no light switches there, and the heater isn't working, and they may not have the proper type of electrical things, because those can essentially be seen. But going through the apartment ain't going to tell us anything about what's the situation with the gas lines or the water lines. And so we go into circuit court, and we've got less than misdemeanor violations for not keeping an apartment fixed up, and we're on the end of the docket. The reason we have the environmental court is because it was taking forever to get anything done. And we created, and it was difficult to create because our first and second division were created by a local act, which then became an illegal local act if we tried to amend it. So if we had just amended it and added a third division, we would have wiped out all of our local courts. And we managed to get around that with a whole bunch of gymnastics, and it's dedicated to that one thing. The first year or two that it was in effect, it met once a week for half a day. And then at one point, it started meeting twice a week for about the same amount of time. You know, it really needs to, it seems to me that if you want to deal with housing, you want to deal with it effectively, it needs to meet every day. It needs to be an all-day court. It needs to be constantly there, but that's not what it is. That's not what it is. And so how does that come about? Well, some of that's going to have to come about through cooperation between policymakers, the board, and the court system, including the Arkansas Supreme Court, saying, let's modify the state district court standard for what's being done in Little Rock. This is what we need. And then I think everybody can get on the same page. But I have to come back to this. It won't do you any good if you can't get anything fixed. And you can't get anything fixed if you don't have any money. And you don't have any money because we haven't said that's what's important. That's your question. I can't answer that otherwise.
And I understand that, City Attorney, and I really do. But I do want to be clear as I can, and then I'll be quiet and let anyone else speak, or we can go home. But when we're deciding if there's small city, I was trying to think of the exact opposite of Big Country Chateau. What would that be? Small city, something, whatever. Another apartment complex, same situation. Same, we go, we have inspections, they find violations, it comes to your office, and we're trying to protect the renters there. You're deciding whether to go to environmental court or circuit court. What I'm trying to understand is which one would be more effective to get relief quicker, part one, and then part two, is there anything we can do to help you get the relief quicker in either of those scenarios?
It's like a traffic citation. The cop takes it in and it gets put into district court. Could we take that to circuit court? Yeah, we could, but what we're going to need to do then is if we're not going to have a citation, we're going to turn that into a warrant, and then we're going to file the charge at circuit court. But wait a second, it's got to be a city violation because the prosecutor is going to be the one that's going to prosecute anything else. So you've got that problem. The second problem you've got is that if it's, these things come in, they don't just all come in at once.
Understood.
They come in over time, and so at what point does it become important enough to take it there? Now, if they have made meth, which we have a very active statute on that, we've shut down apartments pretty quickly, and we've gone to circuit court to do it because they were the old kind, and every part of the HVA system went through the entire building. So the fact that they were making they were cooking meth in one apartment didn't save the others in there, and we shut down the whole building. But there's very few cases like that.
Okay, I understand this is we weren't going to solve the issue tonight, but I definitely wanted to start the discussion and let the public know that that this is important to me, and I think us, that we take whatever measures that are available to us to protect folks who are renters in our city. So, City Attorney, I appreciate you for the discussion, and City Manager and the Mayor for putting this on the agenda. So I will stop there and let anyone else chime in if they need to, Mayor. Thank you.
Let me add one other thing. As I mentioned at the beginning, we can't do anything for 7 days after we find out there's a problem. So, if there's a problem with the residents, it's when we get there, and at the best, we can't do anything for 7 days. That usually is the case that it's been going on for a lot longer time than that. There are states, and I think that, and this is going to require major political change, but there are cities in the area around Seattle. Their code enforcement officer goes on Monday, and they tell them, you've got this problem. They come back Tuesday. If it's not fixed, they cite them. And then they're in court Wednesday or Thursday for the trial the next week, and it's moving that quickly. Yes, that would be very effective. But that's going to take legislative changes.
Director Peck?
It's about something else.
I'm just going in order, so if you...
It's not about this. It's about another memo Tom gave us. Could I just wait until this discussion is over?
Director Miller.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Tom, for your work on this, and certainly Director Phillips for bringing this up. I see that a number of people were copied on this paper that you put together, and I think if we're going to have a real discussion about this, I think, for example, our housing and neighborhoods director, Kevin Howard, probably needs to weigh in on this as part of this discussion. But, I think that would be important to get all this input. I've heard him on TV last week talking about a city our size and the number of code enforcement officers we have and that type thing. Also, what I'm hearing is maybe the environmental court probably needs to weigh in on this. I see they weren't copied on this, but we're going to have this big discussion like this. There are a number of different players that probably need to weigh in on this that we can hear from. But again, I don't want to go over some of the things. I think Director Phillips has brought up some things that was on my mind, but certainly there are some other voices, I think, that probably need to weigh in on this, and maybe that can be done somewhere down the road, but that's what I would encourage. So, thanks.
Director Adcock?
Yes. Coming out of Vision Little Rock, we had a task force that was called rental inspection. I chaired that task force, and we was given the job of rental systematics inspection. We inspected every single family in every apartment in this city in a schedule. And they knew we was coming, and we saw lots of things being cleared up. Bruce, I have not heard in several years any update on rental inspection, if we're still doing it, how it's coming out and everything, but it was a way that we cleaned up rental property in this city. And then it soon got that we only did it, we didn't do it every year, every 2 years, it was every 5 years. And I think we finally kind of just forgot about it. But I would like to see us look at the figures, if that's being done again, or still being done. I would like to know how it's being done and what are we doing and is it working? Because back then, if a property wasn't in shape, we didn't put up with it and we was closing down, but we did pick up, we got the task force was made up of, I think Kathy Wells was on it, and several, I'm not for sure, I think that was before Virgil's time, but we had landlords on that. I know Ferris Hensley was on that, and we got things cleaned up in rental property in this city. And I'd like to see what's being done now on that.
And we'll provide an update. We are still doing systematic rental inspection, but we'll get you an update on the numbers and how it's working.
Thank you.
Director Wyrick?
Thank you, Mayor. Joan, I think, was talked about something I wanted to mention, and that was the rental inspection. And what I recall about, I know we're concentrating on Big Country Chateau because that was such a serious situation, but that was not the first time this apartment complex had been in trouble with the quality of housing that they had. There were a few years back that they were in trouble, and somewhere along the road, they changed their name, I guess to entice more people in there. But when we're talking about the difference between environmental court and circuit court, it seems to me that as you're going through and you're doing this rental inspection program and you cite a number of apartments that have issues, that we ought to have a benchmark. And I don't know what that number would be. I guess it'd be based on how many apartments you have and how many reports you have for rental inspection. But there ought to be a benchmark, and if you hit that benchmark, then maybe that would be when you went to circuit court, bypassed environmental court. I know when I talked last week about the number of 311 items for District 6, and there were like 958 items on there. There were a number of rental inspection requests on that sheet for 311. So it seems like if we had an area and we started having a number of rental inspections and they failed, that there ought to be a benchmark that we can move forward and be more aggressive with trying to get the property owners to repair them, not wait until Andrea goes out there and sees water running through the floors and that kind of thing. That was way too far. I'm thinking that we could have figured that out much earlier than her experience that she had. And maybe could have saved it. Maybe the property owners would have had the wherewithal to improve it, or maybe they could improve part of it, move part of their folks to one side of the apartments or another part of the apartments or something. But I just feel that rental inspection is the key. I think we need to have a benchmark for when we get really serious about the property owners and them repairing their property. And I agree with Director Miller. There's a lot of people that need to come to the table and help us figure this out. so we can move forward. And Big Country Chateau is not going to be the only one. I was reading a newspaper article about another location in the city where people are complaining about their apartments are unsafe. So it's time for us to tackle this one. Tom has some thought-provoking questions and some information for us, but I do believe rental inspection is the key. And I'm not sure how well we're doing on it, how many people we have doing it, you know, what our results are. Are the apartments being improved? I don't know any of that, so I'm look forward to some information, Bruce, that you can help us with. How many's in environmental court? Have we sent any to circuit court? Those types of situations. And if there's a big conglomerate of apartments that we're continually going to, maybe we ought to discover what that benchmark is and then get more serious about what we're doing instead of ones and twos and threes looking at apartments.
Big Country has been in environmental court probably close to 5 years. And so that's, you know, I said a long time ago we should have taken it to the circuit court, but I mean, that's the challenge. I mean, you know, just reporting back every 30 days and, you know, that's the challenge. I mean, Freddie Mac is paying the utilities at Big Country for the 35 units that are still there, and we're going to try to engage a third party to help assist, but nobody's paying. I mean, this is an example. Nobody's paying rent. Nobody's paying utilities. So that's a challenge of, you know, they're not having to pay anything, so they'll stay there. But it is in deplorable condition. And
Was it 5 years ago?
What's that?
Was it 5 years ago?
Yes, I mean, yes. That's the frustrating part of it and the challenging part of it.
So 5 years ago, you think it should have gone to circuit court? And what was the benchmark? So if you can think about this and you knew 5 years ago it should have gone to circuit court, what was the benchmark that drove you to that thinking? That's kind of what I'm thinking. A lot of thinking I'm saying here, but that's what I'm trying to understand. At what point do you take it out of environmental or stop environmental and go to circuit?
And I agree with you totally. And it's those problem properties that there's been no progress at all. I mean, this owner has walked away. I mean, they're trying to find him in New York, you know. So, I mean, I know I sound frustrated, but that is the issue for us, because I've always said, let a judge make that decision on what's the next steps. And I think if we have that mindset, I think it'd change things dramatically.
Okay, so does the board need to determine that it goes to circuit court?
No, I mean, that's the city attorney's role.
Do we need to encourage him to go to circuit court? Is there some documentation, some information that you can give to the board so we can make a decision to press to take care of it much quicker than what we did with Big Country Chateau?
I can give you a list of the time that each property that is currently in environmental court and how long it's been there.
I think that would be helpful. That would be very helpful.
And I can only remember one time that and this was probably 10 years ago, that we took something to the circuit court.
And then you get back to what Tom's question is, how much money do you want to put into it? Because if they have walked away from the property, I'm saying the property owners have walked away from the property, then what's the next shoe to fall after that?
And again, I think a circuit court judge would maybe be more aggressive with the owners than we currently are.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying. You're doing rental inspection. You've done a number of them. Property owner is not fulfilling the needs to make it safe. So at what point, what's the magic number that you get more aggressive in order to save apartments, in order to save living units for individuals that are there? What's the magic number for that?
Yeah. And Tom is right in the sense of that a lot of these, especially not multifamily owners, but a lot of the structures that are in court, the owners don't have the capacity. But, so we're not putting them on daily fines. And so there's no incentives really for them to begin to try to work on their properties either. So it's a challenge.
But you said let the judge to decide that.
Correct.
So instead of, wallowing around environmental court or do nothing, because people are not going to leave unless they have another place to go, which is what we had at Big Country Chateau. So there's a lot to figure out. There's a lot of people that ought to have some input on this situation, but I still think that rental inspection is the start, and then we figure out what that magic number is, what that apex is to do something in an apartment complex. And I really thought Big Country Chateau was more than 5 years. I'm glad you remember.
It might be, to be honest.
It seems like forever
Yeah.
there was something going on over there. So anyway, that's my 2 cents for the situation.
All right, Director Campiris.
Well, thank Tom and Antoine for a very enlightening discussion. Just a few questions. When you go to either circuit court or environmental court, are you suing the owner, or are you addressing a problem?
You're dealing with the owner. You're dealing with the owner for the failure to keep the property up to code.
So if you follow that along, if you say that you have Big Chateau, we're going to pick on them since it's real easy since they're gone. If you get to a certain point, can we, what is the threshold for us to say in something like that we're going to close it down?
If we've got the types of violations where we can declare that it is a public safety hazard, then we can close it down. And that's going to depend upon a lot of things. I mean, you've got to have a better coordination. You remember that we closed down one apartment complex on the weekend before Christmas with a letter that said, be out of here by the next 10 days, and then we did it immediately, and then we ended up paying $600,000. I mean, you got
I'm
to...
going more to what you were saying about in Seattle. If you have one of our inspectors say this place is really bad, is their ability legally to pull all the inspectors and go through the whole thing and then bring back to the board and say, we think this is a health issue, and close it down and sue the person in circuit court or wherever directly, not mess around? I mean, my problem is that every week we had this slow bleed of people saying that this wasn't happening. And it seems, is there a way of, when it gets to a point like Bruce is talking about, or you're talking about, or Antoine's talking about, where it's so bad that we have a dribble. We do something, a month later we do something else, 2 months later we do something else, that we take our whole team in there and say, this is it, and we bring back to the board and we take the heat for it. And we're closing the whole thing down, and we're going to start billing the person that owns it for relocation. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we just close the whole thing down. Because that's what bothers me. If you've really got 35 residents that are still there, someone's paying the electricity, someone's paying the gas, someone's doing something. That's not tenable either. So I would have all the people on here, I'd call a meeting with y'all and Joan, because she's done it before, and Tim Griffin, and say, what can we do when it gets to this point where you say, we're going to close it down right now, how are we going to take care of it, and get it done? I mean, that would be, and then I don't care where you see the guy or see or woman or whoever owns it, the corporation. I mean, your point that people in business, and Antoine can tell you that, if you buy a property and you don't inspect it, and it's not up to code, and you know how bad it is, and you buy it, it's your liability. So I'm not 100% sure that I want to put city money into bringing it back up to code for someone, an individual that owns it, is doing something about it. But I do think that if they buy it and they run it into the ground and they're hurting citizens, which is what you're talking about, I would think we need to be more aggressive in how we take care of that. And I would have a situation where you say, if these criteria are met, a week later, you come back in here and you say to us, we're going to close this place down right now and get it off the books. And then it's someone else's, it's not someone else's problem. We've now addressed the person that's there and what's going on. And you can have, I'm sure that our staff can say if it's X, Y, or Z, and you get down to Z, and then we're going to do it. But it's just crazy what we did. I mean, it's just a death by 1,000 cuts is what we ended up doing. And that's what I'd urge y'all to do. And I would call Tim Griffin and say, we'd like to have a meeting with you, and everybody sit down and talk about it and see how you do it, and let's get some laws prepared, and let's get something done about it.
All right, Director Peck.
This is on a different subject, and I'll be very brief. It regards the other memorandum that Tom put at our desk regarding the Terry House. And Tom, are you asking us for public input, or do you just want us to? I support your recommendation, by the way, but do you just want us to do this offline?
I'm just going to, I wanted to let the board know if they wants to have a discussion, that's fine, but I think that's the route we need to take and just move on it.
I agree. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in or do it privately, but thank you for the memo. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. Director Phillips.
This is not related to the memo. I need to Director Peck's question, I need to get a little more educated too. I trust our city attorney, but I don't know this. I know this is about the Terry House, but I'm not as informed as some of my colleagues, so I want to get caught up to speed, and then I'll reach out to our city attorney. But in the spirit of Director Peck, I want to share some good news. I was at a PRA meeting yesterday and met the owner of the structure that was damaged by fire yesterday on 6th Street. And he wanted to commend publicly the response from Chief Hubbard and his team on how they handled the situation. He said, obviously, it was a very unfortunate situation to lose a structure, but the Little Rock Fire Department could not have handled it better. So I wanted to publicly thank Chief Hubbard and the folks who responded, that their work is being noticed by our constituents, and kudos to them for doing it. That's all, Mayor.
Director Peck.
Okay, I'm not going to let you out into me, so I have some more. So quick. So at the Walnut Valley Neighborhood Association last night, you all know how hard hit they were. They could not have spoken more highly of Public Works. The looting is still going on, much less. The LRPD is out in force on bikes, on motorcycles, and they are extremely grateful, and also for the extension of the Sunderland contract. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Peck. Director Campiris.
And one more thing that's good. I was at a awards thing at St. Vincent's today, and they gave out over $100,000 worth of scholarships to nurses that were all privately funded. But the amazing thing is that at the end of the meeting, the Vogel family donated $25,000 to the East End Clinic to give insulin to every patient that was there free for the next year. So that's a big deal and a great generosity. So if you see any of the Vogel family, you need to thank them.
Mr. Moore?
Just want to be sure that no one had any issues with the professional services under $50,000. Okay, thank you.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
There's a motion, and there's a second. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, meeting adjourned.